When you set out to make a game, there's a lot of questions that you're going to have to answer. Some of them are pretty big, like how does leveling and progression work? Some of them are pretty small, like how long should the dash distance be? And for the most part, you can answer these questions in any order you want. But there's one question that you've kind of got to answer first, and that is, what is this game anyway? I'm Dryden Thomas, and this is the first devlog for Lighthoof, a melancholy Metroidvania focused on zippy combat and tight platforming, where you play as Lighthoof Noah, our deer-footed, skull-masked hero, with his floating light arrow as he explores the secrets of a land strangled by deadly fog. This is, for all intents and purposes, my dream game. But how did I figure out what my dream game is? Here's a process. If you're a creator of any kind, you're probably familiar with the terror of the blank page. You are cursed with the knowledge that every piece of media you've ever loved has started with one, at least metaphorically. And that means that you can make anything, because that void on the page contains the potential for everything. And everything is pretty overwhelming. In my experience as a creator in different media, I've found that there are pretty much two different approaches here: pruning and nurturing. Pruning is all about discovering what parts of the piece of paper you can cut off, whether because you don't want to use them or because you can't use them. For example, I was pretty sure I didn't want to do a sports game or a racing game since I've hardly even played those. I also wasn't particularly drawn to making a first-person shooter, even though I've played an embarrassing amount of them for how not good I am. Because it's just me on this project also, and I have no skills in 3D modeling, rigging, animation, or texturing, I just cut out 3D entirely. So that leaves 2D, choosing between probably a top-down, side-scrolling, or isometric view. Isometric sounds kinda tricky for a complete novice, so let's chop that out too. I like side-scrolling, let's go with that. Affirmative choices can also shrink the page. My main background is in music composition, and I knew what kind of music I wanted to make. Melodic, acoustic, emotional, and that cuts off some branches too. Acoustic sounds suggest that we might be in fantasy rather than sci-fi. I love horror, but a strong melodic development usually won't fit in with those environments. And emotional music leads in the direction of story. At first, I was really drawn to the idea of making a puzzle game. I really loved Baba Is You, Braid, The Witness, and the Talus Project. I felt like I could do some cool music to puzzle to, and it might not push me too hard on the programming front, where I was a complete novice. But then I thought about all the things I'd be missing out on with creating a game like that. I was just coming off of Nier Automata, which had inspired me beyond belief with all this beautiful art and world and philosophy and emotion, and the movement in the game was just so fast and fluid. And before that, I had just been playing Hades a lot and Hollow Knight. In all of these, I did everything that the game had to offer, and I still wanted to get more out of it. If I was going to go to all the trouble of making a game all by myself, shouldn't it be something that I was that passionate about? I felt like a puzzle game just wasn't going to cut it. So I knew I had to get more systematic about this. I made a list of all my very favorite games, and I tried to figure out what they had in common. I found out that I really liked games with a high degree of player expression, whether that's through movement or customization. Games that had a lot of memorable characters. I loved games that move really fast and they have tight combat and they demand mastery out of the player. The idea of great storytelling in games also really appeals to me, though I prefer for it to be delivered in ways that are unique to interactive media and not just small movies between gameplay sessions. I love strategic, flexible character customization too, like the badge system in Paper Mario, or the charm system in Hollow Knight, or anything with a jobs system where you can level up and master things. I also love really subversive and philosophical themes. Undertale is constantly turning you on your head. And lastly, I love a real sense of exploration. I could get lost for ages in Breath of the Wild, and the rabbit hole that Outer Wilds leads you down is a different story entirely. So with these key values in mind, we're getting a much clearer picture of the vision for this game. It's going to be a 2D game with a focus on movement mechanics and mastering those. There's going to be a customizable character that we can explore the world with. There's going to be a colorful cast of side characters telling a meaningful story in the fantasy genre, and we're going to be at least reaching for some somewhat lofty philosophical concepts and subverting expectations. That right there is a lot easier to work with than a blank page. Despite that, all of this is really just defining the borders of the image, not filling it in. To fill in the idea, we're going to use the other process, which is nurturing. When I think about nurturing, I think about starting with a seed and letting it grow and seeing what ideas naturally spring forth from it. But you got to get a seed first. So back in October 2021, I did a drawing challenge with some friends. The prompt on the very first day was arrow, and this idea came into my mind of this guy who had plunged an arrow into the ground, and there was a skull on his head, and there was this red scarf billowing in the wind. I returned to that image when I was trying to come up with a game idea, and I thought, well, that could be an interesting protagonist maybe. So I started asking some more questions about it. Why was he wearing this skull mask? Well, maybe he needs to protect his breathing from something. So then the idea of the fell clouds was born, this toxic fog that if you breathed in too much of it, it would turn you into stone. I started thinking about the arrow. Well, how could you use an arrow in combat without a bow? Maybe it was linked to his mind somehow, and he could fling it around and use it to wreak havoc at a distance. A little bit like Yondu from Guardians of the Galaxy, maybe? But you could also use that to solve puzzles at a distance. And then I was thinking about the fletching on the arrow and how you might use it to change the abilities of the arrow. So maybe these feathers are magical and they imbue it with special energy. Well, if you've got magical feathers, then maybe you have magical birds. And maybe they're mythical birds that flew in the sky and sang the world into existence. And maybe they're extinct now, or maybe they helped, or maybe you have to go find them or find their eggs, or... And then it starts developing from there. And I was thinking, okay, you could make a game out of this. In the next devlog, I'll talk about the process of building those first few mechanics in the game. The jump, the movement, and the attack. So please subscribe and stick around for that. And if you like what you've seen so far of Lighthoof, please head over to Steam and give it a wish list. That would mean a lot to me. See you in the next one!